Welcome along to HK Citizen Podcast and to this week's deep dive, This Week Unpacked.
Hello, we're your hosts, journalists from hkcitizen.net.
And as always, we've sifted through a whole stack of the week's news, our reports, internal notes, basically everything we could find.
Yeah, the idea is to really unpack it all and pull out the key insights for you, going beyond just the headlines.
Get you properly informed quickly. So this week we've got 10 main items we want to dig into.
That's right. It's a mix of big UK domestic stories and then some really crucial developments related to Hong Kong.
Okay, let's get unpacking then. Starting here in the UK. First up, telecoms. A massive merger just went through.
Indeed, a really big one. As of May 31st, that $16.5 billion merger between Vodafone and Three UK CK Hutchison's network, it's done. Complete.
Wow, so that creates Vodafone 3.
That's the name, yeah.
Yeah.
And it means they're now the UK's largest mobile operator. We're talking about 27 million customers.
Really? So bigger than EE and O2 now?
Correct. And the key thing here, it's not just about the sheer size. It seems Vodafone is really trying to, well, inject some new energy and network capability by bringing Three into the fold.
And there's a big investment promise attached, isn't there?
A huge one. They've pledged £11 billion over the next decade for building out their 5G network.
11 billion.
And they're saying 1.3 billion of that in the first year alone. So a serious commitment.
It feels like a necessary move, perhaps, to counter the dominance of, BTE and Virgin Media O2.
Precisely. They needed that scale, didn't they, to properly challenge those giants. The Competition Authority, the CMA, they approved it back in December.
Right.
And it seems those investment promises and some commitments on tariffs were what swung it.
So what does this mean for the others, for E and VMO2?
Well, significant pressure, you'd think. They've now got a rival with potentially very deep pockets and a renewed focus on building out that network.
Could spark price wars?
Possibly in the short term. Though, often when markets consolidate like this, prices can creep up long term. And it puts pressure on the smaller operators too, of course.
And what about us, the customers? Is it better service coming, or are we likely to see higher bills eventually?
The million-pound question, isn't it? They promise better network quality because of all that investment. But, as you say, the CMA will be watching closely. Fewer players can mean less competition, which often leads to consumers paying more.
And for now,
customers just stay on their existing brands. The actual network integration, merging it all together, that's going to take about 3 years, apparently.
Okay, right. So shifting from big business to, well, something quite personal for many vaping, new UK legislation is kicking in.
A major change here, yes. From the 1st of June 2025, so next year, disposable vapes are going to be banned in the UK.
Banned completely. The single-use ones.
Exactly. That's the target. Those devices you can't recharge or refill.
But reusable vapes are still okay.
Yes. Reusable devices remain legal. And while there aren't specific flavor restrictions yet, the bill does open the door for future rules. Things like packaging, how they're displayed in shops, maybe flavor profiles, primarily to make them less attractive to young people.
And this is all part of that bigger government aim, the smoke-free generation idea.
It is, yeah. The same tobacco and vapes bill also includes that plan to effectively ban tobacco sales for anyone born after January 1st, 2009, fizzing it out.
So why this specific focus on banning disposables? What are the main drivers?
According to the sources, it's really two big things. First, the environmental impact. It's huge. Millions of these things, with lithium batteries and plastic casings just being thrown away every year. A massive waste problem.
Right, I've seen reports on that.
But maybe the bigger concern driving this is protecting children and teenagers. The bright colors, the sweet flavors, the low cost, it's all made disposables incredibly popular with young people, many of whom have never even smoked cigarettes. There's been a real surge in youth vaping.
Okay, but what about the argument that vapes help adult smokers quit tobacco? How does the ban affect that?
Well, that's the tricky balancing act, isn't it? The government says that by keeping reusable devices legal, they're preserving vaping as a tool for adult smokers who want to switch.
So they're trying to hit the youth market hard, but leave an option for smokers.
Essentially, yes. Trying to dismantle that youth-focused disposable market while still allowing vaping for harm reduction for existing smokers. It really highlights that tension, between public health goals and avoiding a whole new generation getting hooked on nicotine.
And the reaction has been?
Predictably mixed. Retailers, obviously, face big adjustments. Health groups, environmental campaigners, they're largely praising it.
But some smokers might be worried.
Yeah, there are concerns it could make quitting tobacco harder for some, or maybe even push people back towards cigarettes if the reusable options aren't as convenient or appealing for them.
Okay. Staying within the UK government sphere, next up is this push towards a digital identity scheme from the Home Office.
Yes, they're moving forward quite significantly with their digital identity framework. That includes the gov.uk wallet and also the Visa system.
Right. What's the timeline looking like for these?
Well, the gov.uk wallet pilot is planned for summer 2025, so next summer, with a full rollout expected by 2027.
And the Visa.
That's aiming for full adoption much sooner by June 1st, 2025. That's the system replacing physical immigration documents, like visa stickers or permits.
And the overall goal is what? Convenience? Security?
Both, ostensibly.
Mhm.
The idea is to streamline identity verification for everyday tasks, banking, renting property, proving your age securely, without needing physical documents all the time.
And the wallet would hold things like driving licenses digitally.
Exactly. Driving licenses, veterans cards initially, and the plan is to eventually include things like passports and maybe even benefit entitlements. Efficiency and security are the keywords they're using.
And this is where it gets quite interesting, our sources flagged up a historical parallel. The UK tried something like this decades ago, and it failed spectacularly.
Ah, yes, the 1950s National Registration ID Card Scheme. That's crucial context, actually. It really shows why there's such deep-seated public skepticism in the UK about ID cards.
Tell us about that. It was a wartime thing originally.
It was introduced in 1939 for tracking people, rationing, security, standard wartime measure. You had to carry your ID card. But after the war, people really started resisting it. It was seen as, well, an unnecessary hassle, a burden on civil liberties.
And it just fizzled out.
Pretty much. People stopped carrying them, compliance dropped massively, the records got outdated, it was costing money, and apparently the cards were quite easy to forge anyway.
Hmm.
And there was a key court case in 1950, Wilcock v. Muckle, where a judge really slammed the police for demanding to see someone's card without good reason. That highlighted the civil liberties angle.
So political opposition grew.
Yes, the conservatives under Churchill opposed it, and it was finally abolished in 1952.
So that whole experience really casts a long shadow over this new digital ID plan.
Absolutely. It directly fuels those modern privacy fears. Concerns that this voluntary gov.uk wallet could eventually become a sort of mandatory digital ID by stealth. Worries about data security, cyber attacks being the modern equivalent of those forged 1950s cards, government overreach, digital exclusion for people who aren't online or comfortable with tech.
But what's the government saying to counter these fears?
Well, they claim they've learned the lessons from the past, not just the 1950s, but also the failed attempt to introduce ID cards back in 2006.
Right, I remember that.
So they're heavily stressing that this new scheme is voluntary.
Hmm.
They're highlighting data protection rules, promising independent oversight, basically trying to reassure people that this time it's different.
But that historical memory is powerful, isn't it?
Very. It shows how much public trust matters for these kinds of initiatives, especially when they touch on personal identity and the state's ability to monitor citizens.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly now to UK defense. News of a new strategic defense review being launched.
Yes, a new SDR is underway. And significantly, it's being led by Lord George Robertson.
Former NATO Secretary General.
That's him. Which signals the seriousness of this, I think.
And the goal.
It's being framed as a decade-long plan to really bolster the UK's military capabilities. And interestingly, the review explicitly talks about countering threats from what it calls the deadly quartet.
Which is
Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. So a clear signal that the focus is shifting back towards potential high-intensity conflicts between states, preparing to fight and win, as the language goes.
Our sources didn't have a huge amount of detail on the content of the review yet, though.
Not really, no. The main takeaway for now is the launch itself and who's leading it. Appointing someone like Robertson suggests a real recognition at the top that UK defense needs a rethink. It's quite a departure from the focus on, say, counterinsurgency or expeditionary warfare that dominated the last couple of decades.
But the challenge is funding it all.
That's the massive elephant in the room, highlighted even in the brief source material. The costs are described as staggering, so there's bound to be a huge political debate about whether these ambitions are actually affordable or realistic.
Okay. Now, turning from government policy to party politics, Reform UK seems to have hit some internal turbulence this week.
Yes, quite significant news there. Their chairman, Zia Yusuf, resigned very abruptly on June 5th. He'd only been in the role for about 11 months.
What was the immediate cause? The trigger?
It seems to be directly connected to comments made by the party's newest MP, Sarah Pochin,
Ah, yes, she just won that
in
by-election.
Runcorn and Ellesby. Yeah. In her very first prime minister's questions on June 4th, she called for a ban on the burqa.
On what grounds?
She cited public safety and mentioned countries like France that have bans. Later, she said the idea came from suggestions from the public.
How did the party leadership react to that?
Officially, the party line was that a burqa ban isn't formal policy, but they did call for a national debate on the issue. However, some prominent figures like Lee Anderson and Nigel Farage seem to back the idea of a debate, often linking it to security or integration.
And Zia Yusuf's reaction?
Well, as a British Muslim himself, he was reportedly furious, incensed. He went on X, formerly Twitter, and called her question dumb, slamming the party for pushing something that wasn't agreed policy. His resignation statement suggested he felt his time was better spent elsewhere.
So the burqa question was the catalyst, but maybe there were underlying issues too.
It seems very likely. Sources point to a potential clash of cultures. Yusuf apparently had a more corporate Wall Street management style that didn't quite mesh with the party's existing ways. There was reportedly friction with some MPs and suggestions he felt he was being marginalized, having duties reassigned. He was also heading up this Doge project.
Doge project.
Yeah, it was meant to be this big initiative auditing local government spending. That now looks like it's in jeopardy, as the person leading it under Yusuf also resigned.
And he faced personal attacks too.
Sadly, yes. Reports mention online attacks targeting his faith, which must have made a difficult situation even worse.
Sounds like a significant blow for Reform UK then.
Definitely. Yusuf was widely credited with boosting the party's performance recently, membership, donations, profile, even contributing to that by-election win. His exit really exposes internal divisions, particularly around those sensitive cultural and immigration issues.
And the opposition will be making hay with this.
Oh, absolutely. They're already questioning Nigel Farage's leadership, saying he can't even manage a handful of MPs, mocking the Doge project too. So Reform has a jog on its hands to unify and clarify its direction now.
Right. Okay. Our final UK story for this deep dive takes us to the English Channel, the ongoing issue of migrant crossings.
Yes, a quite stark incident happened this week. The UK Coast Guard actually had to issue an urgent plea over the radio.
A plea for what?
For any nearby fishing vessels to help rescue people from a stranded yacht and also some kayaks that were in trouble.
Why couldn't the Coast Guard or Border Force handle it?
Because, according to the plea, all the official Border Force cutters and RNLI lifeboats in the area were already completely tied up.
Doing what?
Rescuing migrants from about 15 small boats that were attempting the crossing that day. The number of crossings on that single day was expected to potentially break the record for 2025 so far.
Wow. That really throws the strain on the rescue services into sharp relief, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And it's not just a UK issue. Sources highlight this as a global problem. Coast Guards worldwide are stretched thin, and they're increasingly having to rely on civilian vessels, like fishing boats, which often aren't properly equipped or trained for large-scale rescues.
And this situation arises partly because the official policies to stop the crossings aren't really working.
That's a key point raised. You look at the UK's Rwanda plan, stalled by legal challenges. The joint efforts with France, often bogged down in mutual blame. Even EU funding for Libya's Coast Guard, which raises serious human rights concerns. These policy failures often lead to these ad hoc, potentially risky situations relying on civilians.
But isn't there a legal duty to rescue people at sea?
There is. Under international maritime law, things like UN CELAS and SOLAS, all ships have a duty to assist those in distress.
So fishing boats have to help.
Legally, yes. But practically, it's incredibly challenging for them. Untrained crews dealing with potentially traumatized people, lack of medical equipment, the sheer safety risks involved, questions about legal liability if something goes wrong.
And where do they take the rescued people?
That's another huge issue. The law says they must be taken to a place of safety. But defining that, especially when multiple countries might be involved, can lead to serious diplomatic arguments and delays.
And beyond the rescue itself, the crossings have wider impacts in the UK.
Of course. Strain on public services, housing, healthcare, schools, welfare systems. The cost of processing asylum claims is significant. It feeds the criminal smuggling gangs. And crucially, it massively polarizes public opinion. It's a hugely emotional debate, often lacking nuance, and incidents like relying on fishing boats get interpreted very differently depending on your viewpoint.
So what's the outlook here?
Well, the pressures driving migration conflict, climate change, poverty, aren't going away. They're likely to increase. So this ad hoc reliance on civilian vessels just isn't sustainable long term.
What's needed then?
The insight seems to be that despite all the political rhetoric, what's desperately needed is a more coordinated international approach, something that balances the humanitarian need for safe rescue with effective border management and genuinely tackles the root causes in the smuggling networks. But achieving that kind of cooperation faces enormous political hurdles.
Okay, let's pivot now. We're shifting our focus across the globe to Hong Kong for the next few items. First up, the Tiananmen anniversary.
Yes, June 4th marked the 36th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square crackdown, and several foreign consulates in Hong Kong made efforts to commemorate it, mainly using social media.
How did they manage that, given the current climate in Hong Kong? Public vigils are banned, right?
They are, yes, for the 6th year running now, under the national security law. So the consulates used more symbolic, often quite subtle, online gestures.
Such as?
Well, the British Consulate General here posted an image on Facebook, it's just an empty chair, the Roman numerals 4-5 for June 4th, and a phrase in Chinese that echoed slogans from the banned vigils. Cannot bear to recall, yet dare not forget.
Quite poignant. What about others?
The U.S. consulate changed its Facebook cover photo to a candle. They also put electronic candles in their windows. The Canadian, Australian, and EU offices also posted candle imagery online.
And these posts were aimed at audiences both in Hong Kong and potentially mainland China.
Yes, though getting messages through to the mainland is incredibly difficult. The British Embassy in Beijing, for example, posted a short video on Weibo, the Chinese social media platform, that referenced the famous Tank Man image and also the recent white paper protests.
How long does that last?
About 2 hours before the censors took it down. Posts by the US, Canadian, Australian, and EU missions on Weibo were deleted even faster, sometimes within minutes. The German embassy tried a subtle video of a candle with static noise. That was deleted quickly, too.
It really underscores the intensity of China's online censorship around this date.
Absolutely. The Great Firewall goes into overdrive around June 4th. Keywords like Tiananmen, June 4th, Tank Man, even numbers like 64 are heavily filtered. Sources mention sophisticated AI is now used for what they call surgical censorship, deleting content very rapidly and precisely.
What are the broader implications of this kind of censorship?
Well, several concerns are raised. Obviously, the suppression of historical truth, making it harder for younger generations inside China to learn about what happened. It also restricts diplomatic expression. The U.S. State Department explicitly accused China of trying to bury the truth.
And it forces people towards symbolism.
Exactly. It encourages self-censorship, making messages more veiled, more cryptic, which inevitably limits their impact and reach.
Now, while the official vigil was banned and there was a heavy police presence in Causeway Bay near Victoria Park, did ordinary Hong Kong residents try to mark the day in any way?
Yes, despite the park itself hosting a pro-Beijing carnival and reportedly around 6,000 police officers deployed in the area with armored vehicles, sources noted some quiet, subtle acts of remembrance.
Like what?
People were seen just strolling near the park, some pausing for a moment. One 70-year-old woman, Mrs. Ho, was seen holding up her phone with the flashlight on. Another man was briefly detained by police, apparently, for holding a small, white electronic candle. Someone else was reading the Bible near the park's fountain, saying, "God stands for justice."
So, very subdued acts. Resilient, but quiet.
Very much so. It's a stark contrast to the huge open vigils that used to happen in Victoria Park, which was once the only place on Chinese soil where June 4th was openly commemorated on such a scale. Now, the Hong Kong alliance that organized those vigils is disbanded. Its leaders like Li Chican, Albert Ho, and Chow Hang-tung are detained, facing subversion charges under the NSL. Their trial is set for November.
A completely different landscape. Those consulate posts and individual acts feel like, as one source put it, fragile yet vital reminders.
Indeed. But their reach is undeniably curtailed by the censorship and the general atmosphere of surveillance.
Okay, sticking with Hong Kong's changing landscape, the city recently launched a new international institution.
Yes, this is the International Organization for Mediation, or IOMED. It was officially established in Hong Kong on May 30th.
And what is it exactly?
It's being promoted as the world's first intergovernmental organization focused purely on mediation for resolving international disputes. Its headquarters are in the historic former Wan Chai police station.
So the goal is to boost Hong Kong's status as a dispute resolution center.
That's the clear ambition. The focus is on mediation, using neutral third parties to help settle conflicts between nations or between states and businesses, especially complex cross-border commercial disputes. They're particularly eyeing disputes related to China's Belt and Road Initiative.
And agreements reached through IOMED would be.
Legally binding and enforceable, potentially, in the 33 founding member states, once registered. It also aims to develop mediation rules, train mediators, and promote mediation as a cost-effective alternative to litigation or arbitration.
Now, a key point raised in our sources is about those 33 founding members. Major Western countries are notably absent, aren't they?
That's right, and it's led to some describing it as potentially a hollow victory for Hong Kong. The founding members are predominantly from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The UK, the US, major EU nations, they haven't signed up. Only a handful of European states even sent representatives to the launch.
Why does that matter?
Well, it raises questions about IOMED's genuine global reach and recognition. If Western parties are reluctant to use it, perhaps questioning its impartiality given the Hong Kong context, it might struggle to attract high-profile international cases. They might prefer established centers like Singapore or London.
And does Hong Kong's legal environment, specifically the national security law and the new Article 23 legislation, play into these concerns?
Hugely. That's identified as a major challenge. There are worries about neutrality. Could the broad definitions of national security in the NSL restrict open discussion in sensitive mediation cases, maybe involving geopolitical issues or human rights? Would foreign mediators or parties feel comfortable operating freely?
And concerns about judicial independence?
Yes. If Western businesses doubt the independence of Hong Kong's courts where mediated agreements might ultimately need enforcement, it could undermine confidence in using the IOMED in the first place. Article 23, covering things like sedition and external interference, could also create a chilling effect.
So a tough environment to establish trust.
Exactly. One Hong Kong legal expert quoted said, "Mediators need a free and open environment to work effectively." If that trust isn't there, IOMED will find it hard to compete, especially against rivals like Singapore.
Ah, yes. Singapore has a strong mediation center, doesn't it?
It does. The Singapore International Mediation Center, SIMC, has been operating since 2014 and is seen as a major competitor.
What are Singapore's advantages?
Well, it has an established reputation for neutrality and the rule of law, which many Western businesses find appealing. It's built a strong ecosystem, often linking mediation with arbitration through the Singapore International Arbitration Center, SIEC. It has a global network and is perhaps seen as a more neutral venue amidst current U.S.-China tensions.
So what's the path forward for Hong Kong's IOMED?
It has opportunities, particularly in carving out a niche for Belt and Road disputes and leveraging Hong Kong's bilingual legal environment. But success really seems to hinge on demonstrating genuine neutrality and independence in practice. It needs to build an international roster of respected mediators, forge partnerships, and somehow address those underlying concerns about the legal and political climate under the NSL and Article 23.
A story that starkly illustrates those concerns about the legal environment is the news about Joshua Wong.
Yes, very significant development. Joshua Wong, the well-known pro-democracy figure who was already in prison, was hit with fresh charges under the national security law on June 6th.
What are the new charges?
He's been charged with colluding with foreign forces and also money laundering. He was taken from Stanley Prison to face these new accusations.
He's already serving quite a long sentence, isn't he?
He is. He was convicted previously under the NSL for subversion related to the unofficial pro-democracy primary elections back in 2020. He's currently serving 4 years and 8 months for that.
And these new allegations relate to...
They claim that between July and November 2020, he conspired with others, including the exile activist Nathan Law, to lobby foreign governments. The alleged aim was to get them to impose sanctions or take other hostile actions against Hong Kong and China, supposedly to paralyze the government or destabilize the city. The money laundering charge relates to handling funds connected to these alleged activities.
What kind of sentence could these new charges carry?
Potentially life imprisonment. Collusion with foreign forces is one of the most serious offenses under the NSL.
Now, this is raising concerns about double jeopardy, isn't it? Charging him again for actions potentially covered by his previous conviction.
Yes, legal experts quoted in our sources are certainly raising alarms. Some described it as looking like a textbook case of using multiple charges to punish essentially the same course of conduct. Amnesty International called it a blatant abuse of the law and demanded his release.
Wong himself pleaded not guilty, or declined bail.
He declined to apply for bail, yes. The case has been adjourned until August 8th.
For listeners less familiar, who is Joshua Wong?
He really became a global symbol of Hong Kong's democracy movement from a very young age. He was a key figure in the student group Scholarism back in 2012, protesting against curriculum changes, and then very prominent during the 2014 Umbrella movement. He was even on the cover of Time magazine.
And he co-founded the Demosisto Party.
Yes, which advocated for self-determination. He traveled internationally, speaking to politicians and advocating for Hong Kong's autonomy. So, seen as a hero by many supporters, but consistently denounced by Beijing as a foreign puppet. He's been in and out of jail several times over the years for protest-related offenses.
And the national security law, under which he's now facing these very serious charges, that law has fundamentally changed Hong Kong.
Profoundly. Since Beijing imposed it in June 2020, it's reshaped the city. Its four main offenses, secession, subversion, terrorism, collusion, are broadly defined. It applies globally, even to non-residents. It created a dedicated police unit, allows Beijing's security agency to operate openly in the city, bypassing local oversight in some cases. We've seen non-jury trials for NSL cases, judges handpicked by the city's leader.
And Hong Kong passed its own security law, Article 23, recently too.
Yes, in March this year. That further expanded the definition of national security offenses, covering things like espionage and state secrets, with penalties up to 10 years. The combined effect has been a dramatic, chilling effect across society.
What does Hong Kong actually look like today under these laws?
Well, the city is under much tighter political control than before the 2019 protests. The NSL and Article 23 have effectively gutted civil society. Major pro-democracy groups have disbanded. Independent media outlets like Apple Daily have been forced to close. NGOs have shut down or left. The legislature is now filled only with those deemed patriots by Beijing after electoral changes in 2021. Voter turnout in local elections has plummeted.
And the social and economic impact.
Economically, Hong Kong is trying to maintain its status as a financial hub, and there was some GDP growth recently. But there are underlying issues. Unemployment ticked up, consumer spending is sluggish, and there's been a significant brain drain. Tens of thousands, particularly younger professionals and families, have emigrated since 2021, heading to places like the UK, Canada, Australia, citing the political clampdown and also strict COVID policies previously.
Sources also mention strains on services.
Yes, some reports, particularly chatter on social media, mention strains on healthcare from an influx of people from the mainland, leading to long waits. Socially, there are concerns about youth mental health, a sense of hopelessness among some young people. Public protest, once a hallmark of Hong Kong, is described as practically extinct, replaced by what one source called an eerie silence.
And the international reaction to these new charges against Wong.
Critical, as expected. The U.S. State Department called them politically motivated. The EU and UK are monitoring closely. But locally, the hashtag Free Joshua Wong hashtag that used to trend globally is much more muted now within Hong Kong itself. His case is a really stark symbol of how much the city has changed.
Okay, for our final deep dive this week, we're coming back to the UK. A very disturbing incident in Leicester City Centre.
Yes, a really shocking event. In the early hours of Saturday, May 31st, around midnight, a car was driven into a crowd of people on De Montfort Street in the city center.
How many people were hurt?
4 people were injured. Police say 3 of them were serious. 1 man and 2 women suffered fractures, internal injuries, and were hospitalized. A 4th man had minor injuries.
And has the driver been caught?
Yes. Police arrested a 31-year-old man from the local area shortly afterwards. He's being held on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm with intent and also dangerous driving causing serious injury. He remains in custody.
Do the police know why it happened? What led up to it?
Their current understanding is that it stems from some kind of fight or brawl that happened after a private event nearby. It seems the suspect and the victims had all attended the same event, and the cart ramming appears to have been an escalation of that dispute.
Right. And crucially, are the police treating this as a terrorist incident?
No. They have been very clear about this. It is not being treated as terrorism. They believe it was an isolated incident linked to that specific personal dispute. They've stated the suspect has no known links to any extremist groups.
That's important context, especially as there have been other incidents involving cars being driven into crowds recently, both in the UK and globally. How does this Leicester incident compare?
It's a really important comparison to make, and our sources did look at this. For instance, just 5 days before the Leicester incident, there was that awful event at the Liverpool Premier League parade.
Right, where many more people were injured.
Yes, 47 people injured there when a man drove into the crowd. But police also ruled out terrorism in that case. They linked it to the suspect's alleged drug use and treated it as an isolated incident, albeit a horrific one. It happened over 100 miles away from Leicester.
And other international examples.
Sources mention the New Orleans attack on New Year's Day this year, where an ex-soldier was involved, an Islamic State flag was found, and that was classified as terrorism. Clear motive difference. Or the Vancouver Festival crash back in April, where 11 people were tragically killed. Police there also ruled out terrorism, calling it isolated, though the exact motive wasn't clear.
So looking at those comparisons, the police assessment that the Leicester incident was an isolated dispute seems supported.
Based on the information available in the sources, yes. The apparent motive being a personal fight, the distinct geography, the fact police aren't looking for other suspects, and the scale compared to some terrorist attacks, it all points towards it being tragically an escalation of a personal conflict rather than anything wider.
However, there's a warning from experts in the sources, isn't there, about the rise of car rammings generally.
Yes. Even if individual incidents aren't terrorism, experts are concerned about the increasing frequency of car rammings globally. There's worry about a potential copycat effect. It's seen as a relatively simple method of attack, unfortunately.
So the frequency itself is a concern.
Exactly. It raises broader questions about societal pressures, mental health issues, perhaps imitative behavior fueled by media coverage, even when the motives are disparate and not centrally coordinated.
What's the immediate impact been like in Leicester?
Understandably, shock and fear. The street was cordoned off for investigation, impacting residents and local businesses. Sources noted people describing it as absolutely terrifying. There's also been caution advised regarding media reporting, urging care, with using terms like car ramming attack to avoid undue panic when terrorism isn't suspected.
It certainly underscores ongoing fears about public safety, doesn't it?
It does. It inevitably leads to calls for enhanced security in busy public areas, things like more bollards, visible policing, but also, perhaps more fundamentally, looking at how to address underlying societal issues or mental health triggers that might contribute to such extreme violence, whatever the specific motive.
We have certainly covered a lot of ground this week.
Yeah.
From, huge corporate mergers and government tech plans here in the UK.
To political party friction,
Yeah.
pressures on our Coast Guard, and that awful incident in Leicester.
And then shifting to Hong Kong, looking at commemoration under censorship, the launch of a new international body facing challenges, and the stark reality of the national security law impacting individuals like Joshua Wong.
It's been a week that really touches on fundamental questions about how states operate, how economies shift, and how individual freedoms are experienced or constrained.
So, thinking about everything we've unpacked today, from digital identity debates and defense strategies in the UK to the political clampdown, censorship, and legal changes in Hong Kong, we've seen very different manifestations of state power and its relationship with the individual.
Different contexts, different methods, but definitely recurring themes.
So here's a thought to leave you with. What do these varied examples from London to Hong Kong actually tell us about how that fundamental relationship between the individual and the state is evolving right now in different corners of the world? Something to perhaps reflect on.
Indeed. It's a relationship that seems to be constantly shifting, constantly being renegotiated, often in quite profound ways.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive on This Week Unpacked.
We hope you found these insights useful and thought-provoking.
And remember, you can always find more detailed reporting and analysis on all these stories and others over on the hkcitizen.net official website. We're also across all the main social media channels.
Thank you again for listening to HK Citizen Podcast.
Goodbye for now. This program was produced in London.